All right, good morning, everyone. So today we have a great episode. We're going to be talking with Shawn Willson, who is a candidate for Louisiana State Governor. The election is this year.
Yes.
So it's going to be a interesting next few months. So sit back. We're going to be chatting with Shawn and getting some questions answered and finding out a little bit more about him. Alrighty. Shawn, so how is it going?
It is going exceptionally well. We've been on the campaign trail since March 6th, and it's everything I thought it would be and then some. So I'm having a blast, spending a lot of time on the road. I think we've put about 25,000 miles on the backsides here, sitting in a car, traveling across the state of Louisiana, and have enjoyed every minute of it, getting to meet people that I've met, some I have not. Traveling to most places that I've been. I've actually done quite a bit of travel across the state of Louisiana in my 25-year history of working for the state. So very few places I've not been here in Louisiana, and so I'm getting to visit some of those places again. And then other places that I've visited multiple times. So I'm having a blast.
Awesome. Well, so we'll kind of dive in a little bit more. Just to let you know, our presenting sponsor is Chase Group Construction. So I'll show you his logo and his website right there, chasegroupconstruction.com. It's his website. So basically, they are your point of contact for anything commercial or even residential. They take the lead and become your one point of contact for the entire design build process. They have a diverse portfolio of projects that range from medical to popular restaurants and to multi-unit shopping center developments. So feel free to check them out, and they're local guys, local contractors, so they'll treat you right. And also they're sponsors, so they are supporting local. All right, so you said 25,000 miles.
Yes.
Already?
Since March 6th.
God, that is a lot. Like, I bought a car in 2019 and just made 60,000 miles. I couldn't imagine doing that much.
Well, here's the bigger shocker. I was on a radio show in Baton Rouge, and I mentioned that I'd been commuting to Baton Rouge since 1998, basically every day of the week. Many cases I'm traveling to other parts of the state, but at least on average 4+ days out the week I was going back and forth to Baton Rouge.
Yeah.
And one caller actually calculated the distance to the moon and back and says I could have driven to the moon and back and then some. Based on my 25-year commute to Baton Rouge. So the 25,000 miles doesn't intimidate me.
Yeah. So you're a native of Lafayette?
I am not. I was born in New Orleans.
Okay.
I grew up in Algiers, and my mom still lives in the house I grew up in, and it was a wonderful place growing up. I first learned about Lafayette when my dad, who worked in the oil and gas business, was doing work in Morgan City. And then we took a trip up here for LAGCO. And while he was over at Blackman Coliseum, we were walking around the campus and thought, man, what is this place? We've never heard of it, never been here before. And that's where I first heard of USL at the time. And they had a nursing program, and I thought I wanted to go into nursing. And so we moved to Lafayette as freshmen, me and about 6 students from, maybe a little bit more than that, from high school. All came to USL for various degrees and programs, and I lived in what was called Roy Hall. It was the old outdoor facility with the showers and the bathrooms in between 4 rooms.
Okay.
And we've been here ever since. So I moved here in 87 and never left. Just fell in love with the place. So I've been here longer than I've been anywhere else, even New Orleans. But originally I was born in New Orleans.
Okay. And so 87, how old were you then?
I was 17.
Okay.
No, I'd made 18, and we moved here in August of 1987. And I just made 18, and I'm 54 now, so it's been a long time.
It's been a long time.
Been a long time.
Yeah. I was born in 1986.
Don't rub it in.
But you know what? It's catching up. I feel like it. This morning I took a BC powder because my back was hurting. I'm like, all right, here it is. So 1987, you've been here since, and you've made the commute probably multiple times a week or maybe every day to Baton Rouge.
Yeah.
When did you first get started in government? Was it around that time?
I would tell you, I got started in government in elementary school, believe it or not. I was
Okay.
student council vice president in like the third grade. So that was my first elected position, if you will. And then in high school, I got to be student council president at USL. I worked and helped in campaigns because my parents were politically active in New Orleans. They were engaged in various local races, city council, mayor's races. And I remember campaigning for Dutch Morial as a kid with my parents. Moved to USL and got involved in student life. I was a residence hall counselor and house director and student orientation staff. Ended up running for student government vice president because I'd been very active in the fraternity, very active in student organizations, and I won that election. And the following year in 1992, I was elected student government president. And in that capacity, I was also appointed to be the student member of the Board of Trustees, which governs all of the universities in the University of Louisiana system. At the time, it was called the Board of Trustees. It was really every school except Southern University's schools or Louisiana State University schools. Delgado was a part of it. Nunez was a part of it. Northwestern, Northeast, USL, McNeese. So we were the largest system in the state at the time, and I was the only student member on that board. So ever since then, I've had that joy of being in public service. And so I will tell people it started in the third grade.
Third grade. That is crazy.
Yeah.
I could tell you right now, I probably have never thought about any type of position in service until probably middle school, whenever I started realizing that class presidents was a thing. And I'm like, and at the time I was like, I'm not qualified to be that. Like, I don't know what entails. And I guess that's just, that wasn't part of my thought process as a younger kid. But like, was your mom or dad involved in politics or government?
They were never elected. And they were not folks who went to city council meetings on a regular basis. They were not a part of any organization that constantly protested or brought ideas. They weren't even appointed to any board or commission, but they believed in different people who they wanted to support to help get elected to public service. And that's really what we do in government. We have a representative form of government where we elect people to make these decisions for us.
Yeah.
We elect them to represent the ideas and do what's in our best interest. And so they weren't actively involved as the person like I'm attempting to be as a candidate for governor, but they were definitely in tune to the process. They understood what they wanted from a city council member or a mayor. They wanted their communities clean. They wanted it safe. They wanted someone who was going to represent what's in the best interest of the community. And so that in and of itself is what gave me a foundation, I think, of being engaged, willing to lead, being open to ideas and bringing resources to the table, meaning your human resources, your skill set, your capacity, your relationships to the table to provide a better sense of community.
Okay, yeah. So they were engaged in the conversation.
So. Yeah, they were engaged in the conversation, and not daily. I mean, it was, and it didn't happen just around election season. I mean, they had relationships with elected officials, and so we'd see them. They'd talk about issues. They'd be, responding to questions, and hey, what do y'all think of this? And they would give them a perspective. And those elected officials, I'd like to believe, took their information and their opinions and incorporated it in their plans and incorporated it in their ideas of how to lead. And that is what, having a really representative form of government means, I think.
Okay. So I saw on your website that you have a strong faith-based kind of background. Mm-hmm. Were you raised in a church, or did you start going to church as an adult?
So I will tell you, I was raised in a church, but I really wasn't in the church as a kid. We went because our parents made us go.
Well, that sounds like most kids.
Made us go to Sunday school. We had to go to Vacation Bible School. We, most Sundays we were in church because mom was in the choir, grandmother was a deaconess. That was just our environment. And so we were there for the wrong reasons as a kid, I would say. We didn't know why we were there, but that's what our parents taught us, and that's kind of how we existed. As we grew older, we were less directed to go to church.
Okay.
Supported, encouraged, embraced, but it wasn't mandated. We actually had some relatives who had kids who were mandated, and I think my parents saw the negative side of what that was. And
Yeah.
so I didn't personally get engaged on my own for the real reasons why you embrace faith until I got to USL and participated in a group called the UL Gospel Choir, the USL Gospel Choir.
You sing?
Very badly, I do. Everybody can sing in the choir, but not everybody can solo.
Yeah.
And so we did that, and we started working and going to what was called the Love Alive Fellowship every now and then. One was a non-denominational choir. It was really a class that you could take. And then there was this Love Alive Fellowship that was kind of a youth ministry or student ministry for the Church of God in Christ. And then we had Watch Care at the church that we were attending. There was a van that would come from Progressive Baptist Church and pick up students at USL at the time. They would bring us to church on Sundays, and they would feed us and then send you back. So, of course, you're going to go to church if you don't have any money.
Right.
And so that's where I really started to grow in my faith and started to really exercise a practice of faith, and got saved there, got baptized there, and I've been at that church since then.
That's awesome. So is it Baptist?
It's Baptist, yes.
Okay, so I heard you mention Baptist initially. So this has no, bearing on the conversation at all, except for in this moment. But I was raised Pentecostal,
Yeah.
and still am. And to your point of being mandated, I think whenever we were younger, my mom and dad were, definitely in church for the right reasons. They were there, but as growing up in the church, they, you're taught to raise your child up in the ways.
Train a child in the way they should go.
Correct. And so, but it was I never felt like I was forced to the point where if I didn't go, I was a bad person.
Yeah.
So at one point, probably closer to 10 years old, we just kind of drifted away from the church. One reason or another, I think there was probably administration in the church that affected that. And sometimes that's usually the reason why families stop going to church. Powers that be are like, I don't like that preacher. So we stopped going for a little while. And then in 2009, my mom started going back. And I was, well over, 20 something years old. And, she, the Holy Ghost and all that good stuff. She got that, and I saw like just something different about her. So I decided, I was like, I'm gonna start going with her. Support her. And sure enough, going for a few months, I got hit. I was like, good grief. Okay, well, looks like I
need to be here.
Looks like I'm in it. So, because as a kid, you absorb information in ways that it's just more passive. You're just there, you're listening. I played under the pews with the Legos for the most part. Yeah. And if you know anything about Pentecostals, they get crazy. And there were people running up and down the aisles. Like I hid.
Well, they just have a good faith experience.
They do.
They have a great service. I was with the Pentecostals of Acadiana. I'm sorry, of Alexandria for their family day, POA up in Pollock. So we had a wonderful service. Service.
POA. That's our main church there. Yeah. So I go to the POL, Pentecostals of Lafayette.
Yeah.
Yeah. So growing up, I get the understanding of not wanting to force a child. So just kind of thought I'd touch on that.
I think that is really trusting your faith and your Lord to be able to protect them and let them find it for their own personal reasons. That's when you became personal. It wasn't something that was willed to me. It wasn't something that was inherited by me. It was something I learned and discovered for myself. And it was much more meaningful than those who were mandated to experience faith, if you will, because then you can perform, you can pretend, but when it's personal, it's part of who you are. And that, to me, is what's driven me and kept me focused to the point where my pastor, who's retiring, I think after 44 years this year, he's baptized us, he's married me, he's christened my kids, he's married my daughter, just a part of who we are as a family every step of the way, and is a great counsel. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, so we're 15 minutes in. I want to get my sponsors mentioned, and then we'll get to the questions that deal with policy and all the stuff that hopefully makes Louisiana better in the future. All right, so our first sponsor is, first off, it was Chase Group. So the second one is Music Academy of Acadiana. Music Academy of Acadiana is Acadiana's top choice for music. So if you want to learn piano, guitar, voice, drums, violin, all that good stuff, they teach it there. Their experienced instructors cater to students of all ages and musical styles. Graduates have excelled in college and major music competitions and have even made it on popular TV shows like American Idol and The Voice. Founded by UL Lafayette Music School graduate Tim Benson, they've won national recognition and are consistently voted a top music school in the area since 2016. Their goal is to make music lessons fun, educational, and to help foster the next generation of musicians and creative thinkers. And I guess you could say politicians too, because everybody loves a good song, and to be taught music is an important thing in life. So yeah, their website, musicacademyacadiana.com. And then we have our next sponsor. It's Electronic Protection Systems, or EPS, as probably many of you have seen it. For over 20 years, Electronic Protection Systems has been dedicated to protecting families. They offer state-of-the-art home security systems with zero down on your payment, monthly payment. God, yes, you have a month-to-month payment, but you have zero down on the initial start. They even have whole home conditioning systems that help treat your water. They take out hard contaminants, chlorine, help your water taste better. It's a great company, great service. I started using their products back in like a year ago. Before I even knew what EPS was, they came to my door and was like, "Hey, do you want a security system?" Because we just moved into a house. I was like, "Sure," and I didn't want to pay the price that I was paying for the last company, and they came in cheaper. And they're just a great local company, and they have a local office, so it's right there to help you. Check them out at their website, eps-online.com, and their phone numbers on the screen there. It's 337-232-2487, and we also have the website in the caption. All right, so let's get into some of the questions at hand. Yes. Yeah. So your professional experience goes into more of the Department of Transportation. That's been your baby. Tell me a little bit about the Department of Transportation and kind of what you've done in that position leading up to today.
So let me just tell you, I don't know that I would say that transportation is my baby. Government is it. So when you think about my preparation, my undergraduate degree from USL at the time was urban and regional planning, which is in effect government and systems, environmental, housing, educational, land use planning, transportation planning. All of those different aspects gives you a fundamental basic understanding of that. Very much engaged in the public engagement process and community-based engagement. Then you have my master's in public administration, which is really the things that are fundamental to government: budgeting, strategic planning, understanding data and facts, specializing in different things from a policy standpoint. And I also have a PhD in public policy. So we've understood and studied the philosophical underpinnings of what government really should be, or what government really is, and then apply that. When you add that academic preparation to the 25 years of experience in government, 17 of them are in the Department of Transportation. Prior to that, I was in the Office of the Lieutenant Governor, where I managed a program. I was the executive director of what was called the Louisiana State Commission. That was a community-based initiative that gave thousands of young people an opportunity to do public service, kind of like the Peace Corps, but domestically. And then we gave them educational stipends to help offset student loans or debt, and or store it up as an investment to furthering their education. In between the Serve Commission and transportation, I was in the office of the governor, and this is when Governor Kathleen Blanco had been elected. Yep. And I was her deputy legislative director. Pre-Katrina, I moved out of her office, and because I managed transportation policy and did the transition for the Department of Transportation, Environmental Quality, and Natural Resources, we found a spot for me to come into the Department of Transportation as the confidential assistant to the secretary, which basically evolved into the chief of staff role for the Department of Transportation. So my 17 years are in transportation, but my fundamental skill set is really dealing with government regardless of the subject matter, because accounting and strategic planning and transparency and best practices are the same if you're in healthcare, or if you're in transportation, or if you're in education, or if you're in criminal justice, or disaster response, or environmental quality, or labor and workforce development. So that's my background. At transportation, I will tell you, we've been able to do things like make our department much more collaborative. We've been able to open our agency to not be concentrated as an internal bureaucracy, but to be much more engaged with our industry. When I was appointed secretary, there were 4 things I wanted to do. One, I wanted to make a case for new revenue because the value of what we were collecting had lost more than 50% of its value. It had been over 30 years since we got an increase in the dollar amount or the rate that we were getting on an annual basis. You can't survive doing that. We actually passed new revenue, and it was a rededication of existing revenue. So for the first time in 35 years, 36 years, transportation is going to get $150 million a year new next year. And then the year after that, it's going to increase to $300 million a year. Huge accomplishment, because the cost of infrastructure, the cost of materials, the cost of labor, the cost of insurance had all increased exponentially, but what we were spending hadn't increased. I also said I was going to use every federal resource. And so we've actually leveraged every federal dollar that we could get. We, during my tenure, brought in over $1 billion of money that we were not supposed to get because we were competitive, we were strategic, and we were aggressive about going after our federal money that we send to Washington to make sure it comes back to Louisiana. I also said we were going to be much more comprehensive because transportation isn't just roads and bridges. It's about multimodal transportation. It's about aviation. It's about pipelines. It's about rail. It's about transit. It's about broadband and technology. It's about maritime administration. It's about safety. So we were going to be much broader, and in fact, we've done that. And then, as I said, being more collaborative is what we were able to do by working with the private sector, working with municipalities and local governments and law enforcement, disaster response, working with folks like the AARP, believe it or not. We spent a lot of time with that group helping our streets become safer and much more valued by developing a complete streets policy. So my experiences are vast. We actually brought and introduced new delivery models of contracting to state transportation using design build. We had done a couple of design builds, but we greatly accelerated that, doing public-private partnerships, finding some innovative financing using Garvey bonds that were much more strategic and much more value at the end of the day. So yeah, I'm very proud of what we did at DOTD. Okay.
So you mentioned a few things. So you mentioned all of your academic credit, I guess, as your accomplishments there, and a PhD. I didn't realize you can get a PhD in government.
Yeah.
I thought that was like...
Well, it's public policy, so it's not really government. And,
yeah.
And so, believe it or not, a lot of folks with a PhD in public policy may not work in government. They're going to either teach, or they're going to go work in nonprofits, or they're going to go work in some advocacy group, because it's the policy of delivering much more comprehensively and much more substantively what it is you might see as a goal. And so not everyone uses that degree in very practical terms. My experience and my value is I wanted to understand and have my own philosophy of governing.
Okay.
I wanted to bring those ideas and thought processes of what we've learned in that academic place into the real process of how to sell and advance government. And I think it's worked because, recognizing that we've had a very partisan legislature, my job was to deliver success for my agency with that. And I actually used the things I learned and the things I researched in my academic study in my very practical work, like making an argument for what was called cross-median collisions. Cross-median collisions are when you're traveling down an interstate and a car jets across the median and hits another car head on. You will always have a fatality, and you will have multiple fatalities. Well, my appreciation of that subject matter says to me, if I can reduce those cross-median collisions, I can have an exponential reduction in fatalities because I'm no longer having 4 or 5 people die at one time.
Is this the wires that are running along the interstate?
That is exactly right. You're now seeing cable barriers covering about 650 miles of 1,000 miles of interstate in the state of Louisiana. The remaining miles are wide enough to where you have room for correction, or they have what's called a natural barrier, trees out there, or a positive barrier.
Or the Atchafalaya Basin.
Or the Atchafalaya Basin, where you're going to go swimming if you drive off of it. And so the fact that we've put that in those cable barriers out there, and they've been hit on average over 1,000 times a year, think about how many fatalities, near misses we have prevented. And think about the lives that we've saved, because where we have installed cable barriers, you've only had 1 cross-median fatality. And that was because a vehicle ran in between 2 cables. It didn't jump the cables. It didn't go under the cables. There were no cables to stop it. It was really of a freak accident in a sense because a trailer broke off and meandered across, hit another car, and did exactly what the research was telling us. If you have a cross-median collision, you have a fatality. So that's a very practical application of the study of policy and the implementation. That to me is how you really get sustainable change in government. And so I'm using that academic underpinning tied with 25 years of real experience of resolving problems to make Louisiana safer, better, and more efficient.
Okay. And that's great. I love that because I didn't realize just how academics worked as far as that deep in level of government, especially a PhD. I was like, what does a PhD have to do with government or policy, as you said?
Yeah.
So I know you mentioned that it's not just roads, the Department of Transportation, but I think a lot of people that may be listening and that I've seen in comments and stuff about roads, there's one road in particular that has made viral TikToks and everything about Louisiana, in particular Lafayette, is the Thruway.
Evangeline Thruway.
The Evangeline Thruway,
Yes.
and the comments on social media are usually like, why doesn't Lafayette fix this? And people don't realize that the Evangeline Thruway is not a
City
Lafayette
street.
city street,
to the state,
right?
yes.
It belongs to the state, and there's some spots on the Thruway that'll rock your world if you're not careful.
Yeah.
So in short, I don't want to stay on that too long because there's a couple other things I want to get through. But could we see some focus put into repairing that particular stretch of highway?
So the answer is yes.
Okay.
And interestingly enough, you asked that because I worked on that as an undergraduate.
Okay.
I-49 South was a project I worked on as a student at USL in 1991-92.
Are you talking about the future corridor of
future
I-49?
corridor of
That's
I-49.
still future?
That is still, it's actually not future because as I sit here today, you've got $400 million in cash
Okay.
waiting for the repair or replacement. You've got $40 million a year on the books in perpetuity coming to this project. The reality is I don't want to just go fix pavement if that's not going to give you the growth that you need from an economic development standpoint. It's not the safest model because we know having pedestrians cross, bicyclists cross 6 lanes of traffic is not good. When I can actually separate the type of traffic, when you understand the dynamics of who's going through and who's going to. So you really need to build an interstate from an evacuation standpoint, from an economic development standpoint. From
Something without lights
property
and stops,
value.
yeah.
That will allow people to move and move safely. And it's actually going to improve traffic all through Lafayette. People don't realize that. When you build the I-49 South Corridor, folks who travel through Lafayette now to go south will then get on the interstate and not necessarily congest or gum up their local road system because they're trying not to get on Evangeline Thruway. So it's a matter of being smart with your investment. I will also tell you, if we just repaired that, it will undercut the money needed for the I-49 interstate. And you historically don't ever do the worst road in town because it's more expensive, especially if you have limited resources. That's the academic and the best practice. This is no different than what every other state does. The difference is, had we done this 30 years ago, we'd be in a much better position. It would have been less costly than what it is today. But it goes back to one of my fundamental statements was we were living on 1989 value. I will ask you, you were born in 87, 86. Your parents could not live today making what they were making in 1986.
Oh, yeah, absolutely not.
That's exactly what the Department of Transportation was doing. As everything else increased, as everything else got old and needed more maintenance, as everything else grew in terms of its capacity and utility, the money stayed exactly the same. So we could not afford to do it. And as such, it's more expensive now to do it. Until we pay for it and commit to doing it, it's never going to get done and it's only going to get worse.
Okay.
So the answer is it's coming. I'm proud to tell you we've advanced the environmental document. We are very close to having a final say. So we actually attempted to bid out the first section of it, but what was expected to come in at $180 million came in at $340 million.
Of course it does, yeah.
And so you've just got to weigh your resources, because we didn't have the 340 million. I had 300, but that was just the beginning. That didn't include everything else that I needed for that same section. So having the financing in place is going to help.
Okay. And then I guess a follow-up to that question is, every major city, even some of them that are not as major as Lafayette, have some sort of loop.
Yep.
And Lake Charles
Loop
has
is
a
an old
210.
model.
It is an old
It's
model.
an old model.
But it's a model that everybody seems to want.
It's a model that everybody seems to want, but it doesn't necessarily produce the benefits that everybody else wants. The reality is, if you built a loop, you're going to redirect all of the energy and activity from the core of the city to the perimeter of the city. And it creates flight. It creates disproportionate impact on government from a water and sewer, from an educational standpoint. You're relocating entire systems and communities when you build a loop. I'm not opposed to a loop, but you got to understand, what are the impacts of the loop, and how long will it take you to build that loop versus doing what you've done? Because when we were studying the I-49 South Corridor, there was a loop alternative in there. And the decision was made to do what we're doing. And a lot of the land now that was with a loop has developed over the last 30 years because it was given some certainty. And so just because you want a loop doesn't necessarily mean it's the best outcome. It sounds good because you go see Dallas, you go see Houston, and you think, man, look at all of this stuff. Well, you got to understand how they evolved and how it developed and when it was built compared to when it is today. And so I think it's much better for us to keep services and people concentrated, to make it affordable and accessible for people to get to the services that are necessary in a downtown, and not to relocate all of those. And so you see all of these communities popping up. It would negatively impact those communities. And so where you now have residential neighborhoods and some public services, you would be building a highway. And so you're now going to displace all of those people. It's not necessarily the best long-term plan. It sounds good, but it's also exponentially more expensive than what we're talking about. So if you think $300 million was a bad amount for 1 mile, imagine what you're looking at for 30 miles.
Yeah.
And how long will it take, and where will those traffic patterns give you? And who's going to stop at the gas station? Who's going to come to downtown to take advantage of all the investments we've made downtown? Will the university still be as prominently viewed by those who are traveling through this area if now they're going to be 10 miles out and never get a chance to see it? That's the thoughtfulness around what's the long-term impact of infrastructure.
Okay. Yeah, great answer, because I was wondering what you were going to say to that, and I didn't think about the way you placed it. It's makes sense. All right, so we can talk about traffic and infrastructure a lot more. So what is, I guess moving forward in infrastructure, one last question is, what is your top priorities for the Department of Transportation, even if you are, let's say in the event you are elected, is your I guess your focus on that particular part will be thinned out? Like, how does that affect?
Look, my commitment to infrastructure is going to be there no matter what, because infrastructure is economic development. Infrastructure is public safety. Infrastructure is workforce development and access to opportunity if you figure out how to deliver it. We're on a really good path with a new investment. Once we get past the inflation bubble, we're going to see $300 million more, and we've delivered high priority projects that we've talked about for decades. Now is not the time to deviate from the projects we've always wanted. Now's not the time to say, instead of I-49, let's go do something else. Instead of this new bridge in Baton Rouge, let's go focus on this. No, let's stick to the plan. If we plan our work and work our plan, we start to reap benefits that we know and believe will come. And that's what we have not always done. In different administrations, you've seen people create new priorities. I'm not going to come in here and create new priorities for infrastructure. We have a statewide transportation plan that we are redoing for the next 10 years, but we are redoing a statewide transportation plan that we did 10 years before. Let's actually check off those boxes and not plan it and not do it. And so I'm going to be committed to doing that. I'm going to take advantage of the innovation that we've introduced, as well as the delivery models that create more value and are much more business friendly than perhaps what we've historically seen here in the state.
Okay. Cool. All right. So now I really want to get off of the transportation side, because I want to get a little bit deeper. As far as your governance and your policy approach, on your website, you mentioned minimizing extreme policies for long-term solutions. Yeah. Could you elaborate a little bit on that statement?
Certainly. So, whether you're on the perimeter of issues, regardless of which side of the perimeter you're on, if you're on the far right or the far left, my question for you is, what value does that bring to the masses? We can debate what I consider an extreme issue, library books. That's not going to create safety. It's not going to bring jobs, and it's not going to build an economy. In fact, it shrinks that and causes us to lose people. And so if we concentrated on these things that are out here between the goal line on either side and, let's say, the 15-yard line, you're really spending very little time on what's going to move the masses of people that are between the 20-yard line and the 20-yard line of a football field. Think about it. We're sitting across from Cajun Field. Most of the activity on Cajun Field occurs between the 20-yard line and the 20-yard line. The most expensive tickets in any stadium is going to be on the 50-yard line and is going to gravitate out. If you want a cheap seat, you're going to sit behind the goal line. You're going to sit at the 10-yard line because you don't have the best view. You don't have the best productivity. And so I want to concentrate on issues that are going to really move the ball far distances. If I'm on the 15-yard line of either one of those extremes, I don't have very far to go. But if I'm on the 50-yard line, I got to move the ball. And that is what we need in our economy. We need to move the ball. Focus on things like education. Focus on things like criminal justice and public safety. Focus on things like workforce development. Those are the things that are going to really create economic value, not just from a government perspective, but from a private perspective. What's going to put more money on a kitchen table? Eliminating library books, discriminating against a small group of people, not paying people and talking about decisions they're making in their personal lives, or creating new jobs to be able to invest in infrastructure like wind energy. The United States is going to be doing their first Gulf of Mexico wind farm lease sale. Do we want to spend time talking about issues, or do we want to make sure that we can fill the jobs necessary to manufacture windmills, to install and maintain windmills, to lower energy cost?
Yeah.
That is what I'm talking about when I say, let's not deal with the extremes. Let's deal with the things that we know are going to really move the needle. And if we don't believe that, CNBC just released a report about the top states to do business. Louisiana was number 48. Why? Because we have policies that go against what the business communities are looking for. Business communities and the business leaders of this country are saying, what kind of public education system you have? Well, we've got one that we aren't funding properly. What kind of criminal justice system and public policies are you having around public safety? We got a crime problem all across the state, not just in the big cities, even in rural towns. Go up to Jennings and ask the family that lost a loved one, is there a crime problem in Jennings? Yeah, absolutely there is.
Jennings has a problem for sure.
You've got to figure out how to address those issues, because what company is going to come to Louisiana when your literacy rate is below 50%, when over 55% of your population depends on Medicare and Medicaid, and your public school teachers are making $40,000 as a base salary? What is that going to tell you that their kids, the kids of their employees, what kind of system are they going to be? Either they got to pay them a lot more money to put their kids in private school, or they're going to go somewhere where they can put their kids in a public school and have tremendous outcomes and not have to cost so much in terms of compensations for salaries. So that's what I'm talking about when I say extreme policies. Let's concentrate on what's going to move the masses and impact the masses best.
Yeah, and I agree with that. But the thing is, with society and its focus on personal liberties, I guess I'll just broad stroke it, is that seems to be the thing that is talked about the most and put more emphasis on, especially now with the trans movement and, trying to fight for rights there. How are you going to approach that situation? I mean, saying what you just said now it sounds great right now, but when you get hit with all of these things coming at you about societal issues and having to fight for people's personal liberties, how are you going to approach that in a way that works across all the aisles?
Consistency. First, you got to listen to people. God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, which means let's do more listening than we do talking. Second, you've got to understand the frameworks and the facts and apply those facts to government. and think about what it is we do. I realize that not everybody's going to agree with my philosophies. No governor is ever going to enjoy that. Not everyone is going to say, yep, you're right, let's concentrate on this. But if you look at the facts and the data, I will tell you, I think more people are going to be thoughtful about, you're not going to get a major IT company when only 20% of our state has a college degree.
You're right, yeah.
I mean, and so how do we grow those numbers? Let's just be thoughtful. Let's go look at South Carolina, North Carolina, Texas, Florida, and say, we want to be like them. Look at the demographics, look at the facts, look at what they've done for the last 30 years and say, we can't expect the outcome that they're experiencing if we don't put the inputs that they've put in. Same thing with infrastructure. You can't expect us to compete with Texas when you understand Texas spends 3 times as much money, if not more, on their infrastructure beyond the gas tax, and we only use the gas tax. So I can't compete with that because I'm not having the same inputs. The same thing on these social issues, and the same thing is on personal liberties. I want to respect those. I do respect those. And as a leader, as a citizen, that's not necessarily government's responsibility to police your personal liberties, as long as it doesn't infringe upon someone else's right to achieve theirs. And so, I want you to be safe. I want you to be educated. I want you to be healthy. I don't want you to prevent someone else from being safe, educated, and healthy as well.
Okay, great. Look, man, if you happen to get into the role of governor,
just say when. I'd rather say when I get into the role of governor.
Yeah, when. I know that's a popular thing.
You can't say that, but I can.
Right. Okay, so we talked a little bit about just governance in general, and we have a little bit of time left so that I can try to respect your time. I know you have a meeting at 12. As far as economic growth, we kind of touched a little bit on that. What is the strategy into fostering economic growth and creating job opportunities for Louisiana? You mentioned IT companies, and for example, Texas has one of the largest Tesla factories. Louisiana is just excited to get an Amazon distributor building, and that brings jobs, but it doesn't bring the type of jobs, for example, Silicon Valley, even though we're the Silicon Bayou, which I think is just a marketing term at this point to try to hopefully get some big companies. How do you plan to, if and or when you get elected, to promote Louisiana and to drive it into that direction of being a economic force that is comparable to states like the Carolinas or Florida or Texas?
You've got a double whammy here. One, you've got to think about what's happening right now, and you got to think about what the future is going to be. The right now is putting our workforce to work that we have, not the one that we want. Our economy is built on the economy we have, not the one we want. Our workforce is going to be built on the workforce we have, not the one we want. And so leveraging our natural resources, our people, but the river, the rails, the interstate systems, the pipeline infrastructure, the maritime assets, our port infrastructure, all of those are things that will lend itself to make us uniquely competitive on the global market for those types of investments that we're going to see from the private sector. Likewise, when you think about creating an engineering space or creating a tech space or creating a medical field, we could commit to growing more out of our university system to be able to say we can produce more engineers, more doctors, more technos, all of those folks. If we can't pay them competitively, we won't be able to keep them. And so the short-term plan of leveraging people who are here today that are rooted and grounded in this community, in this state today, creating jobs that they can readily go into immediately makes a difference. And then as we look at where our young people are today, a 10th grader, where will he be in 6 or 7 years? Hopefully in a career path that he sees an opportunity because of the double down of what we've made happen for them in early admissions and joint and dual enrollment. All of those things can be leveraged. And that to me is how you build our economy. We also have to be an innovative economy where we're getting more trademarks, we're getting more manufacturing processes, that we're using the ingenuity and innovation of being a Louisianian to say, here is how we can offer value. No one else is going to be able to compete with us on that. Yeah. So let's play to our assets and not necessarily to our deficits. And a deficit is if we want to try and compete with Silicon Valley or Austin, Look at the literacy rates of Louisiana, look at the graduation rates of Louisiana, and look at a local entity or someone coming into Louisiana to say, I'm going to recruit a workforce, but I got to go to North Carolina to get them. I got to go to Texas to get them and then get them to move here. That's a higher lift. That's a heavier lift than saying, I'm going to go to Louisiana because they've got 800 welders and pipe fitters and I need 100 of them to get off the ground today. Let's put our people to work and let's make those investments. The other thing I'll say that I didn't say in the previous segment before we lost connectivity was I think we have to make investments in infrastructure that will make development here much more attractive. We don't have to build a plant, but we can bring water, we can bring energy, we can bring electricity, you can bring access to the curb so that that development, that plant site is then viable. Working with our regional economic development organizations like LEADA, working with our chambers of commerce like UL Acadiana, we ought not have them competing against Baton Rouge, Alexandria, Lake Charles. They should be competing outside of the state of Louisiana. If we're moving one company from one port to another or from one region of the state to another, we're failing. We need to be competing in a global market and in the national market and then working together for secondary business opportunities and primary business opportunities as well.
So I love that. I love the mention of development and making it easier for companies to develop in Louisiana, especially, I mean, in Lafayette. I feel like over the past 10, 15 years, there have been companies that wanted to come to the area, even Louisiana. I mean, Buc-ee's was looking at Louisiana for whatever reason. It didn't happen. Some people say, oh, it was government wanted more money, more whatever. Mm-hmm. And others say, oh, it was, 2016. That's when the flood happened. There's some weird stuff there. And now there's talks of Buc-ee's going into the Ruston I-20 area.
And they're going to the interchange called Tarbutton Interchange. It was the first major project that I was able to deliver. We broke ground. We funded it in partnership with the local government, and that's where they're going. It's a result of infrastructure. Go look at widenings. Go look at locations where we've built interchanges and made access easy and efficient, and that's where you see those investments. That's why you take an Ambassador Caffrey interchange to say it needs to be redone. It's an older model. There are reasons why Buc-ee went where they went and didn't go where they could have gone, and we are aware of those. That's where you have to have the relationship. I-49 and I-10 is a perfect location because you've got many, many more eyes that are going to see it. You're looking at 160,000 versus 60,000. Where would you want to be? You'd want to be where there's 160,000 opportunities for people to drive in and get that brisket burger and then move on, or those darn pecans, and move on. We see that all the time. So it's a matter of sticking to a plan and making the right investments. That's the difference between me and I think the rest of the field, as I understand those patterns of development. Because the Department of Transportation is called the Department of Transportation and Development. Before there was an LED.
That's why there's a DOTD. Okay.
Because the basics of development is infrastructure. Highways, bridges, roads, railways, pipelines, airways, transit systems, maritime shipping, trucking. That is all the D in development. It's not bricks and mortar. It's the assets that bring brick and mortar.
Okay.
The other thing I'll tell you on business is, 90% of our businesses are small businesses. And so from an economic development standpoint, let's not just concentrate on who we want to bring. Let's deal with the 4+ million people who are here today. Let's deal with the businesses that are here today. How do we make capital accessible for them? How do we make tax collections more efficient for them? How do we give them the technology and the workforce that they need as a small business, as a restaurateur, as a metal shop, as an auto mechanic shop? How do we help that? And so universities can be incubators for that. Economic development entities can be incubators for that. And the state can be an incubator for that to help those small mom and pops that are driving our economy and hiring most of our people.
Yeah, I mean, the local business thing, shopping small businesses has been a big push, especially this year. There's been, I don't know if it's a record number, but it feels like a record number of businesses closing, small mom and pops businesses closing. And some say that, it's because these bigger businesses are coming in. But I mean, the economy at this point just nationally is in a weird spot. And I'm pretty sure you see that there's inflation, there's people's pay hasn't really moved up unless you have changed jobs for pay. And so in regards to that, like, what about minimum wage? It's set $7.25 still.
Yeah.
It's what are there plans for you if you get into the position? I know you say when, to increase minimum wage, or like, would that be good or bad for the economy?
So, I will tell you, I think it's good for the economy because it's going to put more money in the pockets of people. It will put more money in pockets of families. So you can put more food on the table. You can increase home ownership. You can increase the quality of our housing stock. You can increase the opportunity to invest and do business. The problem is 7.25% after taxes is very little. And the fact that over half of our population relies on Medicare and Medicaid, raising the wages could lower the ability to take advantage of those federal programs, financially speaking, and thereby create more wealth value in our market, in our economy. So we absolutely have to do that. Does that come at a cost? It does, but I can take you to restaurants today where you won't even see a restaurant advertised for 7.25%. They're going to be at $12, $15, $20 an hour, depending on the market that they're in. So here in Lafayette, my son worked in the marketplace and he was making $11 an hour, and he was working at an academy. He went to somewhere else where he was making $14 an hour. And so if we go from $7.25 to $8 or $9, it doesn't hurt him. It doesn't hurt that business, because that business is already triple perhaps the increase that we're talking about in terms of where they are. But we have to be thoughtful about what that means. Look at the minimum wages in other states that we want to compare ourselves to. Go to Charlotte and ask them, can you hire somebody for 7.25%? And they will do just what you did. They'd laugh. And so you can't necessarily have what they have if you don't put the ingredients that they're putting into their economy. And that's my suggestion too. We need to increase wages. It's not going to be the same everywhere. When I was a secretary, believe it or not, there were people who worked at my department that were eligible for public assistance. State employees.
Wow. Eligible
for public assistance. When you look at the insurance crunch that we're in, how can you afford to manage insurance and have home ownership if you're making 7.25%? It's just not doable.
You're not, making that much, you're not going to do much at all, honestly.
You're not going to do much at all. And so we can't expect businesses to come into this market and expect to bring a $75,000, $80,000 a year salaried position, a quality job with benefits and retirement, if the masses of people are not of a mindset or not built yet financially to be competitive in that marketplace, because they're going to have to import all of that talent. And I think every company wants to be a good neighbor. Every company should want to grow organically with their workforce, which is why we've got to invest in education. We've got to invest in retraining people, particularly those that are in the workforce that can get a non-certification, a non-degree seeking type of certificate that says, I've got an extra skill set that makes me more marketable today, in the next 9 months, in the next 12 to 15 months. That's a lot better than saying go to school for 4 years, go to school for a 2.5-year program on HVAC. You're not going to stop working to do that. So we've got to be innovative, and we've got to be thoughtful about how do we articulate. And by articulate, I mean, how do you move in this market from where you are to where you want to be without losing anything, but only gaining?
Yeah. Yeah, look, I like that. I mean, even if I don't agree on every issue position that you have, or vice versa, whatever that looks like, I think whatever moves Louisiana into a position where its residents can afford more and do more with the money and not have to worry about, where's the next meal coming from. Yeah. I mean, even though businesses, like you said, are raising their own minimum wage already, I really can't find a place that's paying $7.25 an hour at the moment.
It's very difficult.
Yeah, it's very difficult.
And when you think about it, over 50% of our families are struggling to meet the basics, which is going to consume more than 50% of their income. Transit, housing, or transportation and transit, housing, and healthcare. Think about that. What room do you have for investing? What room do you have for spending above the basic needs? And the cost of doing business continually increases. The cost of a gallon of milk continually increases. The cost of a hamburger continually increases. And we index those things. We don't index compensation. We don't index revenue. But look at the insurance increases we've had. We can't stop that. We can't control that. There are things we ought to be doing, holding the insurance markets accountable to make sure that we have a marketplace that's going to be fair and balanced to our citizens. But your cell phone bill, your gas, your consumables like Red Bull and Starbucks, they're constantly increasing because the market demands that. Until we keep up with the market, you won't be able to manage it. And that's where you have these corrections like we're experiencing now in the country because of supply chain, because of what we're seeing in global markets and raw product costs. Those are things that are really important that we have to factor in.
Yeah. All right, so we're cutting it close on time. I'll have one more question to kind of close this out. I wish we had another hour because I think there's so much more that we could
reschedule another hour.
I don't mind rescheduling. I am booked up pretty far, but I might be able to squeeze in a day that's not a Friday. So as far as the vision for Louisiana as a whole, economically, Department of Transportation, tourism, all of that good stuff to be competitive to a Florida, a Texas, a California, because we have our own scenery here. We have our own vibe. We have our own kind of way of life, and people love that about Louisiana. We just have certain things about Louisiana that are not as attractive as other places. Can you share your overall vision for the future of Louisiana under your leadership if you and when become state governor?
So, Louisiana is different than any other place. We are a global state. We are unique. You're not going to find the same culture, the same economy, the same food, the same music, the same art everywhere. I think we need to have a Louisiana that we all can be proud of, one that ensures that you have an opportunity to achieve a quality of life like no other, meaning that you have a healthcare system, that you have meaningful education, that you have an economy and a marketplace that you too can thrive. You may not have to be the CEO of Amazon. You might be a driver in that facility, but you can afford to live here and achieve the quality of life that you deserve. And we can only do that when we work together. We can only do that when we concentrate on those things that we agree on and not fight over the things that we disagree on. And in many cases, the things we disagree on are things that are not going to move the needle as it relates to quality of life and those health outcomes and those economic outcomes and those market outcomes and career outcomes. So focusing on that is where we have to be. I'm a guy who spent 25 years building bridges, literally and figuratively, because infrastructure connects you to opportunity. I want to be the bridge builder for Louisiana, to not just build physical bridges like we've done and build roads and infrastructure like we've done, but I want to bridge the divide to the economy, to the world that we want in our state, the place where we want our children to want to grow up, a place where we want others to come to want to be a part of what we're doing here in Louisiana. And because we're so unique and because we're so special, if we can find that magic recipe, and it's called leadership, it's called engagement, it's called bipartisanship, it's called working together, it's called putting our best foot forward and following best practices. That's how we get to a quality of life that we can all be proud of and we can all promote.
Awesome. Well, look, man, I know you have a 12 o'clock meeting. I really do want to continue the conversation and ask a few more questions, but we'll get that scheduled. And then I also have a few other political figures coming in as far as running for different positions in Lafayette. But you are definitely my first candidate or anything running for governor.
Awesome.
So that is a pretty cool thing to have you here.
Happy
so
to
I
do it.
appreciate you coming on. But yeah, I hope that you have a great run for the office, and I look forward to seeing your continued success, whether it's in office or whatever office you take on.
Well, I appreciate that. And I would tell you and your listeners, visit us at wilsonforla.com. You can learn more about our campaign and engage with us there, as well as using that as a handle for all social media, Wilson for LA.
All right. Well, Shawn, again, thank you for coming on, and I'll be watching the campaign and the whole race as a whole, because let me tell you, it's a big one.
It's a big one.
John Bell, he's termed out, and it's time for someone to replace.
We're one of 3 states this cycle that has a governor's race: Kentucky, Mississippi, and Louisiana. And both of those, one is an incumbent Democrat, one is an incumbent Republican. We are the only open seat, and we have the benefit of having somebody like me in this race. So I'm looking forward to it.
How many, real quick, how many people are running for governor along with yourself?
Right now, there's 7 primary candidates, 5 Republicans, 1 independent, and 1 Democrat. And there are typically going to be another few other people who are going to sign up because they want to say they ran for office in many cases, or that they really believe in what they want to do, but they may not have the infrastructure or organization or resources to really be out front talking to people. So we're one of those top 7 candidates. We are number 2 or number 1 in the poll, depending on what you look at, and we're going to be competitive.
Awesome. Well, Shawn, again, thank you for coming on and giving us just a literal taste. I feel like this is just like an appetizer of what we needed to talk about, but I do appreciate you taking the time
Happy to do
come
it.
on. And
right. Thank you.